So this is the first of our Opera What series. Opera What is sort of a new kind of informal initiative that Experiments in Opera is launching to provide a soft intro to people who are opera curious. So this could be a sharing of work. It could be a conversation like the one we're going to have now. We're still figuring this out, and so I hope that if this is intriguing to you, or if there are things that you would like to see as an Opera What going forward, you'll sign up for our mailing list if you haven't already, and just stay in touch, because this is really meant to be a community-oriented thing, and so part of how we decide to do these is going to depend on the feedback that we get from people in the community. So the first thing we'll do is I'm going to take a moment to introduce everyone who's here from Experiments in Opera. We have the 4 staff members of Experiments in Opera, and then 2 people who are currently in the Experiments in Opera writers room for this cycle. And so today is really a chance to hear from them about their experiences in the writers room. We are also going to spend a little bit of time just talking about opera in general for the opera curious, but the main focus of what we'll talk about is how the writers room works, the application, which is currently open right now for the next cycle, in case you're interested in that, and then we'll go from there. So we'll take the first part to just chat a bit. So I'll ask you to keep your microphones off, and then we'll open it up for questions after we've done the first part, just conversing with the panelists from the writers room. When it's time to go to your questions, you can either put them in the chat, or you can use the raised hand function to raise your hand and actually ask your question in person, depending on how you feel most comfortable. So let us then go ahead and get started. My name is Kamala Shankaram. I am the artistic advisor for Experiments in Opera. I am a reformed soprano and currently a composer of lots of different kinds of operas and other sound installations and concert music and various things. And I'm really happy that we have with us today 2 of our current members of the writers room. So I'll start by introducing them. As I read your illustrious bio, if you wouldn't mind just waving your hand so everyone knows who you are. First, we have Delshon Taylor, who is also a singer, an award-winning baritone, a composer, an author, and an arts equity advocate. He has won awards from the American Prize, the Metropolitan International Music Festival, and he has made solo debuts at Lincoln Center, Chicago Symphony Center, and musical Eichstätt-Fot. He's also, of course, a composer, where he's premiered new works with Wichita Symphony Orchestra, the Julius Quartet, the Opera Theater of St. Louis, the Cincinnati Song Initiative, and of course, he is currently in the writers room. As an arts equity advocate and children's book author, he works with arts organizations to ensure that children, regardless of socioeconomic background, have access to the transformative power of the arts, and serves on the DEI committees of the South Bend Symphony, Inside the Orchestra, Thompson Street Opera Company, the Board of Art Song Colorado, and the Board of Inside the Orchestra. Fabulous. Our next writers room participant is Joni Brittingham. Joni is a writer and the associate editor for Classical Singer magazine. A current soprano, she has not reformed herself. She's been praised for her dramatic versatility by Opera News, her meltingly beautiful interpretations by Forbes, her lovely soprano, and her lucid diction by the New York Times. She's performed at Carnegie Hall, Merkin Hall, Symphony Space, Riverside Theater, New Ohio Theater, Fresh Squeezed Opera, New Amsterdam Opera, Chelsea Opera, every new opera company in New York, basically. And her new book, Practicing for Singers, is available from Amazon.com. Thank you, Joni. So now I'm going to introduce our EIO staff members. Shannon Sindelar is the managing director of EIO. She is a theater director and producer. Recent work includes Lisa Clare's Willa's Authentic Self and regional premieres of Madeline George's Hurricane Diane, Claire Barron's Dance Nation, and the southern premiere of Jacqueline Backhouse's Men on Boats, which is an amazing show. In New York, her directing work has been seen at the Bushwick Star, PS 122, Roulette, and Here. She is currently a producing director for the Obie Award-winning company, the Builders Association. And for many years, she directed the productions of the cross-media performance group 31 Down. She served as managing and programming director of the Ontological Hysteric Theater, where she produced Richard Foreman's works. She also co-founded the Incubator Arts Project and served as curator for 4 years, where she oversaw the Other Forces Festival. She's an adjunct professor at Barnard, an affiliated artist with New Georges, and a board member of the performance ensemble Object Collection. Next up, Jason Cady is the artistic director of Experiments in Opera, a composer and librettist. He performs on pedal steel guitar and modular synthesizer. Pitchfork called him a mod synth mastermind, funny and engaging. And Anthony Tomasini of the New York Times described his video opera, I Screwed Up the Future, as charming fantasy, drably comic, and spacey. His music has been released on Aerocade, Lockstep Records, and Peacock Recordings, and his podcast opera, Buick City 1AM, is available on Apple Podcasts. The University of Michigan Press published his essay in Beyond Notation, The Music of Earl Brown. Jason has a master's in composition from Wesleyan University, where he studied with Alvin Lucier and Anthony Braxton. And finally, Aaron Siegel is the executive director of Experiments in Opera. He's worked as a musician, composer, organizer, and educator for 25 years in New York City. There is little distinction for Aaron between the activities of producing, writing, performing, listening, and learning. Celebrated as a composer of works for percussion, hypnotic clouds of chiming tones, said The New Yorker, and the stage described as softly shattering by the New York Times. Aaron has a long history as an improvising percussionist and band leader. Since 2011, he has co-led Experiments in Opera, helping to bring to the stage countless works by composers and writers and expanding the boundaries of musical storytelling. He has also created work with A.M. Holmes, Mallory Catlett, Tracy K. Smith, Mounter Percussion, Anthony Braxton, Memorize the Sky, Anthony Roth Costanzo, and the EiO Writers Room. So I love reading people's bios while they're there because it makes you so uncomfortable, and it's always delightful to see you all squirming while I praise you. But it's wonderful to also praise you because it's a real community of artists. And as you can see, there are a lot of people who are performers and practitioners of other styles of writing, as well as writing opera. So that's going to bring me to the first question, which is, why did you start writing opera in the first place? What made you want to write opera? And maybe we can start with Delshawn.
Yeah, sure. Happy to start. For me, so in college, I sang in a lot of operas, and it was very clear to me that the works that I was singing or people of color were singing were not roles in which they saw themselves. And so, opera is this art form where there's this profound ability to tell stories at a large scale musically and dramatically. And so I thought, okay, well, there are so many unsung stories as being an African American male, thinking about there are lots of unsung heroes and from the stories of my culture. And so what a great opportunity to tell these stories through the operatic platform. And so that was kind of the genesis to make me want to write opera.
That's wonderful. So it kind of came from your perspective as a performer.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
Joni, you also are a performer. Did that have anything to do with your desire to write opera?
Oh, definitely. I've always been drawn to new music and collaborating with living composers as a singer. And there was kind of this always this constant complaint, as Delshawn was sharing, that there's this constant complaint that like there's not these roles that reflect the makeup of the people who are singers now. And it's like I don't want to keep telling the stories that I find to be problematic. I want to tell new and vibrant stories that are, and it's not that older operas are completely irrelevant to our lives, but there are aspects of them that I find icky. And I think that the pieces that have not aged very well, maybe we should be telling stories about people who are living now and who are having experiences that are operatic in scale now. And even if we tell an historic story, we with new music, we can do it from the lens of present.
Wonderful.
Just to add to that, if I can, also tell it from the lens of the people who have lived those experiences, because I think a lot of times opera has a history of pulling really great composers and librettists to the table to tell stories that they have never lived before, which I think I think the art form is changing that. So.
And how many of their new works, programs, or initiatives have you been a part of at this point? Because I see you've been at the Opera Theater of St. Louis. Was your experience there similar to your experience in the writer's room?
I will say that this experience has been very different in the way that um, I'm working with you all have been fabulous to work with, and you all understand what it's like to be in our seat and like creating the art form. And so I think that creates a different level of safety, also support, as we are trying to create these new works. And so I would say that's probably been the major difference between the two of like, well, you guys understand. And so if I have a question, I can reach out and there's just a different level of support. There isn't this I think in opera companies where the executives and the directors are not familiar with actually using their pen or their voice to create a work, I think sometimes things are lost in translation, and it's a bit more of a machine to push the works out versus creating the culture and the space along the journey and providing composers who might be new to the space the support to be able to do it successfully.
Right. And actually that leads me to maybe a question for Aaron and Jason. So both of you as performers, but not as singers, what drew you to opera in the first place, and why start an opera company? Maybe we can start with Aaron.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that primarily for me, I think that part of my draw to opera was around my realization that I'm just a very visual person. So I was writing scores maybe that were more visual. I was interested in images, but when I was creating work and trying to replicate the feeling of them. And I think there's something about um, just sitting in the house of a show, a concert show, and everyone's wearing their, blacks or, their colors or maybe their tuxes or whatever. And I don't know, it just felt kind of tedious after a while to me. And I wanted to see the performers up there as actors and characters and storytellers. I like the lights and I like the costumes and the sets and just the sense of the kind of larger visual elements of it. So that's part of what was always been appealing to me about opera. And I think also a lot of the artists who I was really into as a performer, people like Laurie Anderson and Anthony Braxton and Philip Glass. A lot of them were doing work that had kind of that spectacle that was a part of it as well. And I wanted to be a part of that. I felt like there was something interesting to say as a composer in that space. And I think that's, I have a lot of I just really like working with other people and I like collaborating. And that's always been at the core of why EIO is such an interesting thing to be a part of, because no season is the same. All of our, all of our, what we're bringing to the work is different. And it kind of just shows up differently every year that we're doing this work. And that's kind of exciting to think to see.
Right. And I love that you talk about storytelling and how that's maybe a different way of thinking about approaching music as compared to the typical concert experience. And so, Jason, you're very interesting because you are also a librettist as well as being a composer. Were you a librettist when you started Experiments in Opera, or is that something that you kind of developed as part of your practice?
Well, yeah, I had done some libretto writing before we started Experiments in Opera, but initially I didn't feel confident doing it because my training was just in music.
What made you take the leap?
Well, partly it can be difficult finding collaborators, and it it is it is a lot easier to be able to revise when you're the composer setting it yourself. You can just do these last minute little word tweaks and not have to worry about it. And um, also it's fun to have story ideas that have musical aspects to them. And also, once I started writing librettos, then I just started getting lots of other ideas for librettos. So it just kind of happened.
They took you down into the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
That's great. Um, Shannon, you have done a lot of work in the theater and particularly a lot of experimental theater. Like when I think about Richard Foreman, I think of the exact opposite of opera. If you're not all familiar with Richard Foreman, he's known for this very flat, affectless style of acting. So I'm curious, what drew you to working in opera?
I mean, opera is music based, even though it's also like a live performing art. And I think people who are outside of the arts might think of theater and opera as closely related, or musical theater and opera as closely related, but it's very alien to me anyway. So I was excited to get involved, and I'm still learning a lot, honestly, about the differences between directing, a play or a musical versus an opera. Um, but that's the main one. The music dictates everything, including the rhythm, which is one of the chief elements the director is responsible for in the theater world.
Like
So
rhythm and pacing, you mean?
yep, yeah. Um, so I don't know. I'm also a very design oriented director, so I think opera allows for artists to really kind of amplify ideas, and have a lot of fun with it. So that's why I'm drawn to it.
That's great. I think this question about the difference between what is an opera and what is theater and what is musical theater is a really interesting one. So I'd love to turn that around to the librettist maybe to start. Um, how do you know that a story is going to be an opera and not a play and not a musical? Like, what is it that is inherent to the way that you think about story within opera? Joni?
Oh, I think, and because I've worked in musical theater as well as and theater, straight theater as well as in opera, I think it really there's an immediacy that is a natural part of like a stage play or even film. There's just like a quicker pace to it. And so it's not that because our audiences are used to seeing faster paced things. So now new operas kind of have to have a different pacing than, Baroque operas Sorry. That's why there's a lot of like cuts and things happening. You know, we don't have the attention span for a 4.5 hour 5 aria handle opera. You know, it's just difficult without a lot of education going into it. And so I think for new opera, part of, you know, what makes it opera is not just that, like, we do have to have the accessibility that comes with that immediacy that's in theater and musical theater. But there does, I think what makes it different from those story wise is that there is always something in opera that is larger than life, that is grander, even in a smaller scale piece. There's always something that is, wait, what happened? You know, I mean, there's kind of a, if you look at the things that that have been turned into operas over the last 10 or 20 years, you know, I just did a production of Glory Denied this past week, and that's about the longest held prisoner of war in Vietnam, which is just incomprehensible almost, like the scale of that. So I think stories like that are the things that that a lot of opera librettists and composers are drawn to now. It's something that is, a play isn't enough in some ways.
The play is not enough to contain the story.
Yeah, well, to contain the emotions of the story that words alone cannot express, and that we really need the music to be a part of that storytelling.
Okay, so the words are not enough. It has to move into singing and music.
It had like, you just have to break into song.
Awesome. Jason, your libretti have a variety of subjects. I wonder if you could talk about how you decide what you're going to make a story about.
Well, can I kind of answer the same question that
Oh
Joni?
yeah, totally.
But maybe I'll also get into what you asked. So I'm of the opinion that nothing is inherently operatic or not operatic. Like, I think any kind of story could or could not be an opera. I think once you actually start writing it, then there's huge differences. I mean, I think a libretto should not be the same as a play or, you know, other forms of literature. But I don't think any, I mean, over the years, many times people have come to me with like some recent news happens and they say, "Oh, isn't that operatic?" And my thought is always, no, it is just something that happened and someone could turn it into an opera. Usually I hope they don't. I mean, I really hope no one does a Trump opera.
It's too late. It's already happened.
Okay. I mean, I won't be in the audience for it. But yeah, I think nothing is inherently operatic or not. The one thing that, aside from the actual writing, that makes a difference is that opera is generally harder to understand than other mediums. So I think that is the reason why in opera we get a lot of familiar stories. Like when we go back further into opera, you know, there's mythology and fairy tales and stuff like that. And that still happens today, but more often we get either adaptations of well-known stories in other mediums, or we get, as I was talking about before, recent news or historic events. So familiar stories are a lot easier because opera is so hard to understand. So I think in writing a libretto, if one is not doing a familiar story, which I never do, I don't do adaptations or things that are based on real life. It's always just original fiction. So the challenge is to think about how to make it intelligible. And I can't say that I've always succeeded at that, but I aim for it.
That's actually a really good segue into the composers, which is, how do you approach writing music for an opera? And is that different from the way that you approach writing music for things that are not opera? Delshan.
Yeah, happy to start. For me, I mean, I've done art song, musical theater, and I don't think the approach is different. I always start with two questions. Like one, what is the story? Well, if there isn't text, like what is the story that I want to tell through music in this moment, in this phrase? And then the second is, if there is text, like how can I honor the text, uplift the text, or go explore different emotions musically that maybe the text itself can't bring to life musically. And so I think those two questions are the two that I always start with, regardless of the type of song I'm writing. And I think the next step, which kind of decides um, the approach from that point, is like, what are the forces that I'm working with? And like those then kind of set the parameters on how I move next. Yeah.
Right. Aaron, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, all the things that Delshan are saying, sort of ring true for me. I think one of the things for me that is really important in terms of intelligibility also is a sense of embodying the text. So even though I'm not a singer who sings publicly, when I'm working on a new opera, I do this when I'm working on art songs or when I've worked on um, things that might be considered more sort of like avant-garde, songs or vocal performances, is I do a lot of just singing to myself, recording myself, trying to understand what the characters sound like and how, like, where in the range they are, like what rhythms are they singing in, really trying to understand the speech, because I think that if you can get a character on stage and you can give them a distinctive, like, rhythmic way of talking, that actually goes a huge ways towards giving them an identity on stage, giving them intelligibility, and understanding to some extent how we're supposed to relate to them. I mean, there's a huge
Mhm.
difference between someone walks towards you and they go, like, and then if they walk towards you and they're going, ah, it's like, what to do with them. And so I just do a lot of vocalizing and improvising like that allows me to find what the sound of those people are. And by the way, like, because I don't necessarily, I'm not like a huge student of the canon of opera, and because I listen to a lot of different music, what comes out sometimes sounds like a jazz, standard, or sometimes sounds you know, like a rock song, or any number of things, or something from a different culture, that might be in my ear, like Indian classical music, or um, I'm really aware of not wanting to steal from and appropriate other cultures, but I do think that because I like to listen to all that music, it's part of the soup of my ear and my creative activities in that way.
And I think that's something that's consistent about the work that Experiments in Opera has made over the last 10 years, is that it does have a lot of stylistic diversity. That it's people who are coming from more towards the classical spectrum of what a singer should sound like. And then there's people from the jazz side. And then there was, of course, Roddy Bottom from what band is he in again? It's Faith No
Faith no
More.
more.
Yes, I
Yeah.
always got him mixed up. Is he Faith No More or something else? But yeah, a whole range of things. But this actually brings up a question for Shannon, which is, Shannon, as a director, one of the things that you would do in a theater production is to help to find the character for each of the people in the play. But here in opera, some of that work has already been done in the way that the composer has said it. So how do you negotiate meeting the composer's needs, but also helping to create that character?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's all about, hopefully a director is just helping an actor find it, right? And you each come into the process with your own ideas, and then the director is hopefully just getting everyone on the same page and telling the story clearly. So I mean, for me, it's kind of the same thing. It's just about communicating and, bringing everyone into that same line of thinking. But yeah, the music does dictate quite a bit. I mean, it's immovable in a good way, but it lends a lot of support in terms of spirit, and tells us a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to pause just a second to see if anyone has had any questions come up so far. And again, if you have, you can either put it in the chat or raise your hand, or I will keep going.
Yeah,
And that's
did I understand right that Experiments in Opera does a lot of collaborations involving multiple composers?
yes. So maybe this is a good time to talk about the writer's room specifically and what this program is. So the writer's room developed based on a model of how TV writers' rooms work, which is that you have multiple writers contributing to the same story. So the first writer's room project that we did, I guess it's technically, it was released second, but it's the first writer's room that we did, was for a piece called Everything for Dawn, which is a TV opera. It's available on All Arts. And that was created very much in the vein of the writer's room. The writers created a show Bible together, which is who are these characters? Where does this take place? What is the overall arc of this show going to be? And then each writer was responsible for an episode on their own, but they came back together to workshop them. And then the 10 episodes of this series were each set by a different composer. So in that way, then we have a whole variety of people who are in the room together contributing their own perspectives to make something that was very, very collaborative, that nobody could really have made on their own. And since then, the second iteration of the writer's room was a podcast opera called Aquanet and Funyuns, made in the same model. And this is the third iteration of the writer's room that will premiere this June at Here Arts Center at the end of the month. We will send everybody the information about that in a follow-up email so that you can come and see what the fruition of this is like. So this model is really moving away from the historical model of one composer, one librettist, to make something that is a little more, I guess, universal. Is that a good word?
I mean, that feels like an okay word to me, but inevitably it always takes on, if not a three-dimensional, then a 4 or 5 or 6-dimensional sort of feeling, understanding like both where the music is coming from and the stories and characters. And so it just feels like there's more going on. There's more kind of intentionality and intensity around the work. That's the way I experience it. But Jason,
Yeah.
you might have other thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to also clarify for Vance that in the examples that we gave of the TV opera and the podcast, so like the TV opera, for example, it's 10 episodes, and each episode is by a different composer and librettist. So the composer is not like collaborating with other composers in the sense of like they're all working on the same piece together. Like the composer is just writing their own episode, and then another composer's writing the other episodes, but it's they're
But
not
I
really
would say
getting
that there is a
intermingled.
shared instrumentation and the
Yes.
shared voices between. So although each composer is going off on their own, they're not making those decisions about instrumentation and voice type the way that they would if they were making completely their own piece.
Was there a shared material?
No.
There could have been, but most
I
of the
mean,
composers chose not to do that, I guess.
I mean, it's a few times people have compared this to Exquisite Corpses, which is something that I very much disagree with, although it it keeps being brought up for a good reason, because there is a slight similarity. But we always workshop these pieces. So when the composers go to the workshops, they see the other composers' pieces and they can have conversations. So there's no kind of forcing any kind of blindness or unawareness of between the composers. But generally, composers just kind of want to do their own thing.
Though that is something that we are talking about changing for the upcoming iteration of the writer's room, is giving the composers more opportunity to be part of the process earlier on than they have been in the past.
I think one of the things that's important to me is that because we're an artist-led organization and we have librettists and composers, we're just constantly aware of what we would like to do as artists, and that helps to shape the dynamic of the writer's room when we're working with it, because all of us are involved in that process, and it's a big negotiation. And so someone might have an idea and some of us might really like it and some of us might want to do something different, and we're trying to always kind of negotiate what that looks like and create something that ultimately has a unified artistic vision and feeling behind it.
And I'd actually love to open it up for Joni and Delshawn to contribute, because you have just gone through this process. Maybe we could start with Joni as the librettist on your piece. Oh, and I should say that you guys collaborated together also, so you have that additional experience of collaboration. Joni, what was it like for you being in a writer's room with a group of writers?
I have told several people, and I've talked about like what this experience was, because this was my first opera libretto. I've written a lot of like poetry and things that have been set by classical composers, but this was my first like real experience of writing an opera, and I've really been spoiled because I was in, oh, thanks, Selshon. And I was in this room with people who were completely supportive. And we played ideas off of each other. We responded, and through the process, we each little scene was each week, and then we'd read it aloud. You'd hear how it would actually sound, which I do feel like one of the problems with new opera is that a lot of it is really siloed. And I, as a singer, I have sung works where it's like, I don't think the librettist edited this at all. And I think one of the dangers is falling in love with your own words, which, you've talked about the iterations of the writers' rooms, and like part of why we've kind of been in a golden age of television is because the writers' rooms are collaborative. And because you're not writing this thing by yourself and falling in love with your words. And then, like when we did our final read through, mine was too long. I didn't know what to cut. And I asked the room, what do I need to cut? Please help me murder my word babies. Because I didn't have the ability to be subjective about my own creative work. And it was really helpful to have a group of people who were like, well, this duet's great, but it's not advancing the story, so that's what's got to go, and that was really, really helpful. And then Delshawn had lots of questions for me earlier in the process, and like as he was moving along, and honestly I was really just like, I think everything you do is great, so and I trust you. And part of it was because of coming from this particular environment. So, and it has given me, I will say, a lot of courage moving forward with current and future writing projects, that like, I'm okay with sharing things with people that maybe just need to be cut or tossed, changed. Yeah.
And Delshawn, you didn't have quite the same experience as Joni, but what was your experience of the writer's room like?
Yeah, I mean, I was probably like most composers, pretty like siloed and like focused on trying to, as Aaron mentioned, like get the text in my body and like what does home feel like musically for each of these characters in these moments. And Joni gave me a nice musical or just a very like diversified like plate of musical or of text to be able to like and characters to be able to explore musically. And she was really great in like if I had not a question about something or wanted to change something, like I always want to make sure as a composer you're checking in with the librettist that way you're honoring what they wrote. And so I think like the collaboration process has been really great. I think I'm a pianist by also, and so one of the challenges for me when I saw the instrumentation, I was like, wait, there's no piano. And so I was like, oh shit, I have to think outside the box here. And so I think it was a challenge at first, but I'm really happy that I had this experience because it made me think outside of the box and like what can I actually create with these different instruments that I wouldn't necessarily put together. Uh,
Mhm.
and like the both of the workshops, the reading with the singers and the orchestral workshop were really helpful um, to hear. And Jason mentioned, hey, you left out a couple of instruments, and I was like, oh really, I didn't know that. So like I had to go back and like and add those in. And so like again, it's just been a really great experience. Yeah.
That's great. I'm gonna check in with our crowd again just to make sure no one has questions.
Oh, hey, Kamala, Johanna had a question in
And
the
I
chat.
kind of answered it a little bit, based on some of the conversations that we've had before, Jason, about that and talking about the difference between music theater and opera, really coming down to some extent, like what are the influences that the composer is engaging with, right?
Right.
And that being part of how we make that distinction. We're not, we have a lot of work that could be qualified as music theater, and I think there's lots of music theater that could be qualified as opera.
But
And
I would add to this that it's also around the norms of how things are made. And just in musical theater, it's very common practice to come and give new pages or to move songs around in the play. Whereas in opera, you you don't really make changes at the last minute like that, and you pretty much leave the structure of the music intact because the music is often driving the storytelling. Whereas in a musical, a lot of the time you can move a song from one place in the show to another and it doesn't impact the overall arc of the story.
Also, in musical theater, there is a book writer and a lyricist, whereas in opera, there is just the lonely librettist.
Yes, but
Hey,
not
yeah.
lonely anymore because they're in the writer's room. I see
And to
Caitlin
your
has her hand up. Caitlin, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having this. So it's really helpful to talk about a lot of the music is being informed by these different genres. Trying to take my hand down here. What about from a librettist perspective, a new librettist perspective, like how do someone who's never written libretto, how do other genres of writing influence a libretto? Maybe if you're not someone that is used to writing poetry or but still libretto curious.
Yeah, Jason, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, I would look at two things. Basically, plays on one hand, and I think plays are a lot better than screenplays because with screenplays you can have rapid cuts all the time that are not very practical on stage. So I think plays are a lot better than screenplays. And then on the other hand, looking at poetry and song lyrics, and um, there's a small distinction between aria and songs. Not that this necessarily always needs to be realized, but songs are generally like verse, chorus, maybe a bridge, that kind of form, whereas arias are more like ABA. So if you're doing research, I think one thing that could be helpful is just reading a couple of old librettos. Like a good example is there's some Lorenzo da Ponte librettos that were for Mozart operas. Like there's a Dover edition that's really cheap, and one doesn't even have to read the whole thing. Just like look at it, read a couple arias, flip through it. Um, and I think that would be helpful. And you know, one can pull from tradition, but you don't have to either. I mean, you know, the lyrical sections can be closer to songs. And my own feeling of opera is I tend to think more of like a neo-Baroque style, whereas most opera from Wagner onwards has more of a continuous flow to it without the big distinctions between aria and recitative.
I think to extrapolate from Jason's point, like going and seeing things is also really, really great. And then you start to figure out, okay, this resonated with me. How did they handle this particular problem? I didn't really agree with they did this. What did they do here that did not resonate with me? And over time, you start to build up a sense of, you know, what is my aesthetic? What is my voice? How do I want to tackle the particular problem of this story? So like going and seeing and listening to as many things as possible. I have a question from, oh, sure.
Oh, can I add
Oh,
one,
yeah,
one
go
thing
ahead,
to
go ahead.
Caitlin's one thing that that Jason told me like early in the process that honestly made me make the decision to apply, having never written it before, was that if you look at the quality of opera libretti, a lot of them really suck. Even like really well-known, really like beautifully like famous historical operas, the libretti they're kind of meh. So you know, you can only go up from there. So it's okay to just like put some words down on the page and just kind of see if they work. And like, you know, I think you know, as a singer, I came from the like perfection driven, because that's, you know, how we're taught as singers. But I definitely changed my mind about that, because it's like, we'll just give it a try. It's cool. If it doesn't work, then you chuck it. And if it does, then it's really fun. So yeah, like, you know, look at how, you know, especially listening and looking at some of the libretti of the past, you'll be like, wow, this is bad. And you can do better.
I think Caitlin is asking a follow-up, what makes a libretto suck? So I don't know if you all want to tackle that particular can of worms, but
you know, where the stories where you're like, what on earth is happening? You know, where it's just like what, or where it's like, it's just so like just I'm making high art. And it's like, I don't know. I kind of feel like there's sometimes where it's just like a little self-aggrandizing. You know, we've all been in, so what I always, the way I determine whether like a piece that I saw sucked is if I go home and I need to put something else on to cleanse the palate.
And then
And
Dilshan, did you
later articulate why I don't like it? But yeah.
Dilshan, did you want to add? Great. Joel, I see you have your, well, I want to give Joel a chance because we're getting towards the end of our time together.
Sorry, it was a different topic, so I didn't want to.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
But, yeah. Okay, sorry. Thanks for this, everybody. It was super interesting to hear from Shannon's point of view what the word rhythm meant. And I thought that this kind of whole thing of controlling time, because as a composer, it's what I think about so much. I was wondering about the thing that sort of come up as a source of, you know, possibly creative tension or possibly uncreative tension, like in the projects that you've had going on. I'd be really interested to hear about that. Yeah. Thank you.
So if I could summarize, what has come up as a source of tension?
Or like, yeah, if this sort of different approach to like rhythm and timing in a piece, so that's something that's, yeah, that's been a, yeah.
Okay, so Shannon, I think this one's for you.
I don't know if I understand. Do you mean tension that's come up in the development, or
yeah,
finding
sorry,
tension within the piece? Oh,
I meant
you know, so yeah, we this is my first writer's room that I've been involved in, and we are about to start rehearsals on June 10th, so we'll see once we get in the room. But you know, I think what we've been contemplating is how to pair people. We think really carefully about that, pairing composers and librettists. Joni and Dalshan are a perfect example of, you know, the ideal situation because they respect each other, and they were able to collaborate really effectively and economically. So that was a success, but it doesn't always happen that way. And so yeah, we're just, but I will say, like, in real life, it doesn't always happen that way either. So it's always, you know, it's tricky feeling people out and just trying to find a collaborator who sees you and you see them. So in this situation, it is a little more technical, and you know, you've got an organization at the helm, and so we're trying to center the artists and make sure that they're able to communicate and make decisions on their own. And you know, we're just trying to develop the process as we go. This is only our fourth iteration, but so far, you know, we've had a pretty good track record of pairing people and making rooms that that are productive. And I don't know if Aaron or Jason or Kamala want to say more about that because you have more history.
Right. I would actually love to turn it over to Aaron to talk about this application and the upcoming deadlines. And then if anyone has questions about applying, now would be the time to ask.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Kamala. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen for a moment. I think you can see the my window there. And this is I put this link in the chat for you all. So this is the room that we're currently, this is the writer's room that we're currently accepting applications for. And there's a lot of information here. I won't go through the whole thing. But suffice to say that, you know, we have really specific things that we know are successful in here. And so we're really looking for people who are interested in stretching themselves and want to collaborate and understand what it means to be a part of a community as they're working. You know, I think we try to make what we're looking for really clear so that when you are going to put together your materials and submissions that you're sending to us, that you can do so with a sense of, okay, they're looking for, you know, a piece with, you know, a setting for voice, wide range of instruments, you know, those kinds of things will help to inform both the composer's perspective and from the writers also looking at things like, you know, original plot or, you know, writing that demonstrates a kind of lyricism. We want to make sure that you feel like you can, this is not an opaque, you know, process. We're trying to make it as transparent as possible so that it's clear about what, you know, what it will look like when we make those decisions. All the dates are here, and they include, you know, a lot of work that's happening this coming fall. And then it will also be something that stretches over the next 2 years. So it is a significant commitment. It's not a commitment that involves heavy amounts of work every month, but it does involve some regular communications and collaborations with the partners that you're paired up with. And as Kamala said and Shannon said, there's multiple phases of the work. So we really see this as an opportunity to come into the group, get to know each other, try out some simple collaborations before we really get into the larger pieces that we'll be creating. And the idea is that that larger piece will be premiered as part of our 25-26 season, likely in the spring of 2026. So it is a 2-year process. The application link is right here. And all the details that you would need to know about it are also right here. So I encourage you to go check it out. And, you know, if you have questions, you can always write to all of us. If you have questions right now, we're happy to answer a couple things so that if you want to make sure things that would be beneficial to the larger group. And if there are specific things that are, you know, really specific to you as an artist, then I think we can maybe handle those offline.
I would also add that we do have these intensive periods built into the schedule where we would ask you to meet in person in New York City. So that would mean that if you're not based in New York City or in the tri-state area, you would need to find a way to come and to also provide housing for yourself, just to point that out right away. Does anyone have any follow-up questions? Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us and getting to know the writer's room a little bit. Please do reach out, sign up for the mailing list. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. The deadline for this season, or this cycle of the writer's room, is July 3rd. So you have a bit of time to think about if you want to apply and put your application package together before then.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you,
Have a great
everyone.
evening or
Thank
afternoon,
you.
wherever you are.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.